Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is another episode of the Audiophiles Anonymous Podcast, typically with myself, MrAyrit, and Signcraft. But today we've got a bonus. We've got Wave Theory here with us as well to discuss the topic of FOMO, ugraditus, when do you upgrade, how do you upgrade, things like that. So before we get into that, Wave Theory, do you want to just give us a little rundown on who you are and what you do and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, hello, and thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Let's see. So, yeah, you asked, who am I? Well, I am a music lover, for sure. And interestingly, I actually, when I launched my channel on YouTube, I did like this, answered this question, basically, and I put links to my channel introduction and like some of my known hearing quirks in every description of every video, and you know, of course, those are my two least watched videos. So, but I mean, they're there to just give a quick rundown. Like I grew up in a very musical family and musical household. Now, I do not play any musical instruments myself, but I was in a religious family that was very, very active in the music side of our worship gatherings and that sort of thing. So like my mom is a pianist. She is much better than she gives herself credit for on that, but I can remember distinctly when I was a very young kid, she would put me to bed and then just go right down the hallway into the living room and sit down at her piano, and I would fall asleep listening to her practice, like, you know, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, like, you know, those kinds of things. My dad picked up bass guitar at some point before I moved out of the house and taught himself on that. Both parents sang in church choirs a lot. My brother, I would listen to him practice for hours. He is formally trained on saxophone and taught himself piano and cello on top of that.
Wow.
And then, like, so when I was about 10, I think I was about 10, we were attending a small church at the time, and both of my parents were involved in the music stuff, and there was no one to run the sound system. And my dad just kind of turned around and looked at me and said, "You're going to learn how to do it." So here I was, this 10-year-old kid sitting at a soundboard trying to figure out what all of these buttons do and what all these sliders do, and just, yeah, basically became self-taught, training myself like how to try to hear problems before anyone else did so I could fix them. Next thing you know, for about 15 years or so, just about every Sunday morning, I'm back there running a soundboard, and then of course we've got rehearsals every week that I'm like setting up microphones for and like doing all of the tech stuff behind the scenes. So, yeah, so there you go. Just a general love of music was instilled early on, and just being active in the listening to and producing of, but also like listening to it critically from not really like a music theory standpoint, because I don't do music theory. Like, I don't have perfect pitch. I really don't even read music. I just have been self-trained and immersed in a world where I had to like try to find the flaws and fix them before anyone else did. So
that's an interesting
there you go.
background to have, and like, yeah, I imagine that really did make you like a more critical listener of just like, oh, that sounds like crap, I need to change something.
Yeah, well, I tease my mom because I'm like playing all of those classics when you know, after you put me to bed, and I can just hear them down the hallway, like, you messed up my brain. And I do it lightheartedly. Like, I think it's actually a good change. But I mean, now that I have like been formally educated, and you know, I went, you know, I was a high school math and physics teacher for a while, and then I went back to grad school, and I got my PhD in physics and STEM education and all of that. So I also have like the science part of it, the science understanding behind what was all going on there, and of course being in the education and learning about learning sciences and all of that. It's like, yeah, hearing all of that back then at that age probably did wire my brain differently than some others, let's just say. So I tease her about that, but I'm also grateful. I really enjoyed that experience, and that was those are memories that I cherish there.
And now you've got a YouTube channel. You're doing reviews. I saw you like sharing some of the tracks that you really like and like to use for reviews and all that. It's like, give us just a little rundown of what's on your channel if folks aren't familiar.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen my channel, like the bread and butter is just reviews of gear, primarily headphone gear for now, just because like of budget and space and life situation, headphones make more sense. I do someday hope to get more into speakers as life situation and budget and space, allows for it. So that's the bread and butter. That's what most of the videos are. I do have a handful of more science-oriented videos. Like I have one that explains output impedance and damping factor. I have another series that is still in the works where I talk about the science behind why we humans can in fact hear differences in cables, which I realize is like an unpopular opinion in some circles, but it's like, I mean, I actually am a scientist and have actual real science to back this up. And I also feel like because of my training of being like an educator, being in physics, but then also learning like the learning and the cognitive science behind it all, I think I've been able to put those things together in a way that has not been discussed before in our hobby. And so I hope that it's a unique, I know it's a science-grounded perspective, but I'm pretty sure it's also a unique perspective that has not been shared or talked about within our hobby yet. So that's up there as well.
And that was a question we got here too, as I put it out, is people were wondering, as we're talking about upgrades, when to upgrade a cable. So maybe we'll revisit that, a little bit later on as we get in here too. Yep. But I know I really appreciate those more sciencey videos. I'm a science educator as well, so I nerd out on that stuff and that as well. So it's fun that we have that in common.
Cool.
So upgrades. So maybe we should start with, you talked about your experience, listening critically for things that just don't sound right and trying to figure out how to fix them. Yeah. Is that how and when you guys upgrade? Like, obviously we all have, I think we're all wearing at least $1,000 headphones right now as we're doing this. So we obviously have upgrade-itis to some.
And you guys sound great. I mean, you sound great.
So what makes you guys upgrade? What, like, do you have to try everything? Is there something wrong with your system and then you try to fix it? What sets you on the path to like buying more stuff or more expensive stuff or different stuff? Or
yeah, I think that's something that's sort of evolved over time, as it probably has with most people in the hobby. I think early on, I probably had a less methodical method to my madness. It was a little more like, oh, that looks cool and everyone's talking about it. It must be the next hot thing, like that. It sounds like the way that guy's describing it, that like that's exactly what I want to jump on and what I don't like about what I'm currently listening to. And so it was a calculus of like, what's the price delta from the current thing I have? Usually more, not usually less. How much more? That's always the tricky question. And then like, am I getting some signal from the community that it like addresses something that's bugging me? Like, oh, I like this headphone, but it's not that comfortable. Or I like this headphone, but like the bass just isn't like really where I want it to be. Or, I like this headphone, but it's too hard to drive with my current gear, and I know that I'm not really getting the most out of it. Like finding some little flaw is usually the starting point, and then looking for what's trending, what's interesting, and getting excited about it. That's kind of how I started. I think now it's evolved to something that's a bit more considered, a bit more patient.
The hype trains aren't pulling you in as much anymore.
There's still something where I'll see. Now I like the oddball stuff, so I'm really a sucker for like some, brand from Vietnam that no one's ever heard of that's got, or like whatever. I'm like, oh, what is that? I gotta try that. So it's a little more of like that curiosity that gets me in the FOMO mode now. But now it's more like about system building and synergy and like trying to end up somewhere. As before, I think it was more just like, oh, I wish this had X quality. I hear that thing has X quality. I'm going to jump on it.
Okay. I mean, I think mine is largely similar experience, really, in that, like, at first I was just like, I wanted to hear everything. And then as soon as somebody said something sounded really great, I was like, well, I want to hear that. And it's only this much more than what I have currently. I think at this point, I've heard enough stuff and I've tried enough stuff that I feel like that stuff doesn't influence me nearly as much as it used to, as much as I just have, yeah, I just want to try maybe more interesting things or something that I think is going to be a little bit different than what I've had before. And especially now, since I've had a chance to listen to some of like the best headphones that are out there, really, I'm not really worried about chasing quality as much anymore as just like trying different sounds and seeing if they suit me. Maybe is more of how I'm going about it now, but I definitely had a big FOMO problem when I first got in the hobby. And that's probably, I mean, that's really why I have the channel to begin with, is just because I was buying a bunch of stuff and trying it and thought this would be a way I could justify doing that. Sharing some of it on YouTube, probably unreasonably so, but that's where I'm at now.
I distinctly remember a moment where my significant other walked into the room and she saw like 7 sets of headphones hanging on the wall, and she just looked at me and she's like, "You need to find a way to get paid for this." So,
have you figured that out? Because I'm still
trying. A little bit, yeah. When you're a small channel, the YouTube platform is not necessarily lucrative. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, take a long time to save up for a $1,000 headphone.
Yeah.
Based on ad revenue.
So I mean, I guess like for me, and I heard this a little bit from both of you, is like it's how does the gear that I'm listening to make me feel, kind of a thing. Because I mean, listening to music is an emotional experience, and so it's always like, am I happy with my current setup? And if I'm there have been stages that I have found, because similar to like you guys, when I first got into the hobby, I just was like super interested in it and like thought it was really cool, especially when I moved into the headphone side. I was like, wow, there are so many different options and like intentionally different sound signatures, which is a little bit different than speakers. Like, I'm not saying that all speakers are tuned to the same, they are not, but I get the impression that there's a little bit more intentional variety in headphone sounds than in speaker sounds for reasons. Like, it's easier to swap out headphones than it is for speakers, right? Like, that's one reason. So speakers have to be more generalist usually in their approach. But so like I got into that and just like started exploring everything that I could afford without undoing my financial obligations in other places, right? And so forth. And then as I've gone up, I just realized that I kind of go in stages. I'll like make a significant upgrade and then I'll be happy for a while and I'll just like really connect with the music. But then eventually that critical part of my brain, even when I'm just trying to listen to the gear listen to the music instead of listen to the gear, like there's still that part of my brain that's like, hey, you know what, that vocal doesn't sound very natural. That doesn't sound like a real human voice, right? Or something like that. And then it'll nag at me, and And I was like, okay, now I've got to investigate like what's going on with that and how do I fix that. And unfortunately, for a lot of these things, like, I mean, there is a general correlation between price and performance in this hobby. Like, there are exceptions, of course, but more often than not, you get what you pay for. And so fixing those little things that nag at you, unfortunately, just get expensive after a while.
Now, let me ask you this, because this was a question that somebody put out, was as you're spending more on gear, do you enjoy it as much? Do you enjoy it more? Do you feel like, because this particular subscriber of my channel said that, he feels like as he spends more money on gear, now he feels like he has to really analyze it and test it, and he said sometimes it doesn't feel like he's having as much fun. I don't know. I feel like maybe I get to that point at some points in time, but anymore though, I kind of, if I'm not enjoying something or just like really enjoying myself, I usually just kind of review it quickly and then move on and like sell it. That's kind of how I am anyway. So like, I don't let something that I don't enjoy, I don't let it like own my listing time for too terribly long anymore. So that's not a huge problem for me. What about for you guys? Do you feel that way?
I mean, there's something to looking at a rack of gear and knowing the total dollar value that will nag at you and sort of set some expectations with you in terms of how you should be spending time with that and what you should be doing. It's a tough one because I think, wave theory sort of nailed it. It's like as your listening becomes more educated, more sophisticated because you've heard more things, and you start sort of narrowing down your focus and the nags get smaller, they get more expensive to fix. Like once you're fixing subtleties, those are not generally cheap fixes.
No.
Big swings like more bass or, the mid should come forward or, those like you said, I think both of you guys mentioned, there's so much variety in this hobby, right? Even at the couple $100 price point, there are so many different headphones, so many different sound signatures. So if you, and I feel like, Drew, you and I have talked a little bit about this before, like people getting into the hobby, I think it's fun, like bounce around. Don't try to get in your lane too quickly. Like try a closed back dynamic, try an open back planar, try something, from Bear Dynamics that's got one very distinct point of view. Try something from ZMF that's totally got a different point. It's really fun to educate your brain about what you respond to and what you really like. But then once you kind of get in your lane, I think that's where the little upgraditis starts to sneak in, because I guess it's the difference between just trying stuff, sampling, versus upgrading, right? Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at.
Like a deliberate, if you're just sampling, because I mean that's kind of what I still do is I've been doing tons of trading lately, right? So it's just like I'm not even necessarily looking for anything. I'm just like, hey, I'm done with this piece of gear. What will somebody give me for it? And then I just try something different, and it's sending me down paths that I wouldn't have ever gone through. It's not really upgrade-itis, but maybe it's more that FOMO of just like, I don't know that I'm worried that I'm missing out on something as much as I'm just curious to try more things, and it's just kind of like whatever lands on my doorstep at this point is kind of cool with me anyway. So that would be one of my suggestions for people, like you were saying, Signcraft, is if you're just getting into the hobby, or if you want to avoid upgrade-itis, just kind of try different things and maybe just trade, so you're not spending any more money. And if you're searching around on the forums for used stuff, you can usually get pretty decent equivalent trades. You may even be able to trade up in some cases, just depending on what people are looking for. So that would be one of the things that I would suggest to people, is if you're worried about spending money and you're getting tired of what you have, is don't necessarily try to upgrade it, just try to trade for something else and try it out.
Yeah, right. This idea of different, not necessarily better, is like one line of thinking, but which is great. In the world of upgrading, actually trying to shape a system to be that quote unquote perfect system for yourself. I think there is something inside us at Wave Theory. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You get this little euphoric hit. I do, right? When you get a component and you get a new synergy and you're like, yeah, I wanted to fix that. I fixed it. It's like a puzzle, right? You're you do a ton of research. You're like, oh, I think this DAC with this headphone and this amp, it's a little too etchy. It's a little too sharp. It's it's not as fluid as I like. The detail's great, but so I'm going to research. I'm going to find something that doesn't have those characteristics. And you find it and you slot it in, and for whatever amount of time, an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year, you're like, yeah, nailed it. And then, like you were saying, Wave Theory, that little thing starts to creep in where you're like, But I think there's that. It's I don't know. It's a dangerous little cycle. Getting that little euphoric hit. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I agree. Yeah, there definitely is some gear that the first few sessions of it, you're just like, wow, this is amazing, and I'm really getting into it. And then over time, you're like, okay, yeah, maybe again, maybe that vocal timbre isn't quite what I thought it was initially, or okay, yeah, actually this is getting a little fatiguing, now that I've had it on my head for 2 hours, or whatever the case may be at that point. So I generally agree that, yeah, that happens. Was there something else in your question there?
I guess I'm getting into a little bit of the psychology of it, right? Okay. Why is it so hard for us to just sit back and be I think the Audiophiliac had a comment about how we wake up one day and we decide like our system's no good anymore, and it's like your system didn't change, you changed.
Yeah,
like why?
there is-
Like there are times where I'm like so happy with the setup, and I'm just like this is great. Like sure, there's probably better, but I don't care. I'm just so happy with the system right now. And then days later, weeks later, months later, I'll just be like, I'm not happy with this anymore.
And it's weird how it can cycle back around, like, because my main personal setup is like a Berkeley Alpha S2 DAC with a Vioelectric HPA V281 amp, and then my high-end headphone is a Hi-Fi Min HE1000 V2. And at times, I think that the treble is too hot, right? And like it's too sharp and shrill. And then I'll come back at some other point. I'm like, oh, actually, it's just right. And I don't know what causes that so much, but I mean, for me, I have found that a complication to all of this that we are talking about right now is like when I got into reviewing, it's like I don't have a ton of time to just listen to my stuff anymore, right? Like, I have a set of headphones that I own and that I use a lot and that I'm familiar with the sound on. But rarely do I plug them into a signal chain that is completely my own anymore, unless I'm intentionally comparing something in that signal chain to a new piece that I have, that's in for review. So, I mean, I think I mentioned this to MrAyrit before the podcast started. It's like a couple of these questions, I get where people are coming from, but I almost feel like we reviewers might actually be the wrong people to answer that, because our focus has changed a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Well, and two, like people are just sending us stuff. That part is part of it too. Is at this point, like if you just get sent gear, you're not as maybe concerned with running out and buying stuff, because I'm kind of like, eventually maybe I'll get it from someone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that it does help a lot. But maybe it's just, and we've mentioned this before, I know on some past, I don't know what we were talking about, but in some past episodes, this is like, is this just the reality of the personality type of the audiophile? Right? Like, because if this wasn't your personality type, like we'd all just be using AirPods and we'd be done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I have often wondered, I mean, because again, I studied a lot of cognitive science in grad school and all that. I have wondered, like, is there a personality type associated with, being in the audio hobby, like to the extent that we and the people who are listening to us are, right? Then I also balance that with the question of, like, most people who have any kind of disposable income have a hobby of some sort. I mean, it could be cars, it could be clothes, it could be collecting watches, it could be playing golf, or anything like that. And there are many, many other hobbies where there are ladders to climb in terms of like the gear that you can use, how that gear shapes the experience within the hobby, and that sort of thing. And so I think we need to think about both of those things, right? Like, who are we as audiophiles, what drives us? But then I think we also need to balance that against, like, are we really that different than other hobbyists in other hobbies? Just that for whatever reason we seek better listening experiences for music, whereas they are seeking a better hunting experience or a better driving experience, or whatever the case may be. Like, are we that different?
I like that a lot.
I don't know.
I like that a lot. That's a great. Now I feel way more justified.
But it's also weird, because I feel like we audiophiles feel the need to defend ourselves and our hobby more than a car collector does, right? Or something like that. And some of that is we are aware of, like, I don't know about most people, but huge numbers of people on this planet love to listen to music and will voluntarily listen to music. But of that group, which is, most of the planet, right? But of that group, there's just we select few who keep wanting to scale up in terms of the experience and, the reproduction of it. So it's one of those things where like, and maybe MrAyrit, you can comment on this too, being an educator, it's like everyone has gone to school, so they think they know how it should be done, right? And so they have opinions on it, but then there are the real experts within it who have, you know, the better idea of what's going on. Like, so many people listen to music that I think it's a similar effect where it's like, okay, I listen to music, I enjoy it, I don't need to spend beyond that. All those people who do are crazy. Spend your money somewhere else. And so, yeah, we audiophiles have this need to justify ourselves more so because of that, you know, that broader social pressure. I think.
You know, tell me what you think about this, because I'm just, as you were mentioning, you know, golf, for example.
Yeah.
You know, I play golf. I enjoy golf, but I'm not great at golf, and I don't spend a ton of time thinking about golf. So I don't really worry about upgrading, because I could have the nicest set of clubs in the world, and I'm still going to be a bogey golfer, right? It's not going to make a difference. But I wonder if it's how much thought you're putting into it, right? Like, so we obviously spend a lot of time listening to music, but also thinking, you know, pretty critically about it. And maybe that is just like the mental investment is what drives us to want to spend more. Because if I was golfing every day and really thinking about how I could improve and stuff like that, then I probably would want to buy new clubs and would justify spending, you know, $500 on a driver or something like that. But I just don't spend that much time thinking about it. I'll go out and play and enjoy myself, but I don't think about it that much, and I don't sweat the details that much.
Yeah.
But and same with driving my car. You know, I go to work, I come home, I don't think about it all that much as long as it gets me there and back.
Right? I mean, I drive a 98 Honda Civic with 250,000 miles on it, so, you know.
Yeah, I think there's like a passion element here, obviously. Like, what are you passionate about? Like, I know I've met audiophiles who I don't think are all that passionate about actual music, which is always shocking to me, but they're rare. And most of the folks in this hobby are genuine music lovers, right?
Right.
So, like, if you are a cyclist, you love, like, say, road bikes, right? And, like, you're very passionate about that. You have some ability to do it well. You maybe have some friend group around it, some social group around it, and you get invested in your gear, your shoes, your bike, your upgrades to the bike. You know, it's like, that's lots of research, lots of forums to go on, lots of things to test drive. Like, it has a lot of similarities in terms of I'm trying to seek a certain level of experience, a certain level of performance. Like, each person has a slightly different take on what that means to them in terms of like how they want their bike set up. There's no one perfect bike, like there's no one perfect stereo. So I think there are a lot of parallels you can draw between other pursuits.
And when is the last time you ever heard anyone giving anyone else grief about buying a better bike?
Oh, I've given some people some grief, for sure.
Okay. Well, we can scratch that.
Well, it probably depends on...
You just erase that from the podcast.
You just don't hear it. You just don't hear it, right? Like, if somebody walked up to me and was like, "Hey, do you see my new bike over there? It costs $5,000." I'd be like,
Wow.
Like, mine does the same thing, and I bought it for $200, or you know what I mean? But
Exactly.
but that's how people see headphones too, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think that's fair if you're on the outside of the hobby. I think the other thing that is consistent that we can learn from is that there typically are social groups around hobbies, right? There are forums, there are people you know in real life that are interested in it, and you get this connection from, you know, having interactions with those folks around this topic area. And I think that is actually, unfortunately, one of the things that feeds into FOMO, because
absolutely,
you know, you're hearing about other things people are trying, and now you want to try them, or a lot of the conversation is about gear, not necessarily tuning or tweaking the gear you currently have, but getting new gear. And we celebrate people in our hobby when they get a new piece of gear, and it's sort of like upgrades is like built into the culture. And so if you're not kind of upgrading, if you're just like, you imagine being on HeadFi, just being like, yep, still got my same stuff, it's great, like nobody cares.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because it's not even that you have to interact so much, but as long as you're seeking out other experience and like other people's experience, there's always going to be that like curiosity in the back of your mind, for sure. Because I mean, if we weren't watching YouTube videos and getting on forums and things like that, and we weren't paying attention to any of the news, we probably wouldn't upgrade. We wouldn't even know what to upgrade to, right? You wouldn't even think about it. But if you're engaging with all that stuff, it's going to make you want to try new things and to upgrade, and to say if you feel the same way about something as other people do, or I don't know. It's the social aspect is huge, though. I think that's definitely a big
Well, and I
piece
think
of it.
that's also important, like to find a social group where you know how your tastes compare to the people who you are talking to. And I think, Signcraft mentioned the excitement that can build when you're talking to somebody about like the gear that they have and they're trying. I think there's even more of that when you know that there is someone who has similar tastes as you, but for whatever reason they have been able to climb the ladder a little faster than you have, or before you were able to, and you hear their experiences and you think, oh yeah, that's where I need to go, or something like that. So, I mean, really, even reviews and we reviewers are we're a little less personally in that role. Like I'm sure each of us here have viewers and listeners whose tastes are similar to ours, or the opposite. They are very different, right? And so, like, they know when we like something, they will probably like something, or the other way, when we don't like something, they very well might.
They're
right?
like, ooh, I gotta try that when he hates it.
Right? But that also takes a lot of time to establish, because you have to have enough common points of reference with whoever you're talking to or listening to, be it that friend who you're talking to on forum, or that reviewer who you are watching on YouTube, or reading on the web or anything like that. Like, I mean, that takes time and money and investment to figure that out too. Right?
I love that, though. That's a piece of advice that I think people can take, is like being thoughtful when you're reading people's comments or reviews or watching videos of like, oh, this person's saying stuff about a piece of gear that I've tried that I totally agree with, and like I gotta like bookmark this or make a note of this, because having those, whether it's like a very direct connection, and I've found a few people just by accident on the forums that like have really similar tastes. And it's great. I'll always ask them like, hey, I'm looking at this thing. Have you ever tried it? Like, what do you think about it? Mm-hmm. And like having almost like a Sherpa, or it's like, it's either somebody who's a little ahead of you, who's like giving you lessons learned, or it's, somebody that can sort of come alongside and parallel path with you, so you can sort of like defer risk between you. I think that's like a very helpful way to like tamp down the FOMO a little bit and sort of get to try by proxy and learn by proxy, and because it's unknown, right? FOMO is about the unknown. It's about, I'm missing it, I don't have it. So for somebody who's got the same or very similar taste to be like, oh no, I tried it, don't waste your time. It's like, oh, great, scratch it off the list. Like,
I want to ground, like, the FOMO experience is not unique to us, right? Like, if you want to know what FOMO is, like, watch a 2-year-old kid who's just told he has to go to bed, right? Like, it's not just audiophiles. It's not just us. Like, it's an across-the-board human thing. So, in a lot of ways, I do think that, like, we audiophiles are wound a little tight, and we just need to relax a little bit.
That's interesting. You mentioned a 2-year-old, like, or think about the young child that like hasn't touched a toy in like a year or months, and then someone comes over and picks it up, and then now there's so much FOMO, right? Because now someone else has it, and now they're gonna miss out on that immediate experience. That's a pretty interesting thing to think about.
Although there might be some overlap with some of our hoarding tendencies, but going on with that, but we'll see.
I was gonna say, I feel like hype trains is something that I know we all kind of deal with, and probably every hobby, deals with. But I'd say that's just buying used. I mean, people know that Signcraft and I we're big used people, just from all the risk it can kind of defer. But it's really interesting to see if something gets super hyped. If you can just wait and just watch the used market, you can usually see, because it's like you will see a flood of things come on the used market. And so just those little, just if you can exercise a little bit of patience, you could either, one, get a good deal on it, or two, you can see if there's a flood of them hitting the market that maybe they aren't the end-all, be-all like it might have immediately, been presented as.
I think that's really good advice for those of us who live here in the United States. Like, my understanding, now I've not been there, but having spoken to audiophiles on forums and all that who do live there, like, if you're in Europe or Australia or even Canada, like, it's like harder to do that. And like they just have less robust used markets for whatever reason in those locations, and I don't know what causes that, but that's an unfortunate reality for our friends somewhere in other countries.
Well, the other thing that
lucky us, I guess.
Yeah, lucky us.
Yeah.
The other thing that contributes to FOMO is not just new, right? New is, of course, like there's marketing behind it. There's early reviewers who are getting releases and telling you it's the new best thing ever. If you've got the version 1 and this is the version 2, that's worthless. There's that. But I think there's also in this industry, as you get like deeper into it, more like interesting niche players where like there's just a limited supply. And so, I mean, like Donald North Audio, right, makes these really beautiful blue amps, and they're very expensive and they're very rare. And to get a new one is like a year on the waiting list. Like same thing with like Deckware, or like ZMF's always releasing like super limited editions of this or that. Or like I was even thinking about Flux Acoustics and the headphone amp manufacturer out of the Ukraine. Like they're just kind of shuttered right now because of what's happening. I mean, I feel terrible. I feel terrible for them. And like, I'm not like whining, like, why can't I get my amp? But it's like there are outside of, the big dynamic players that are globally distributed and pretty much undisruptible. There's a lot of really interesting, whether it's like single person shops or like small interesting teams, both here in the US and abroad, doing cool stuff. And like, sometimes you discover something like that and you want it and you cannot get it. It is not available to you. And I think that, I know for me, being somebody who likes sort of niche and sort of more out there stuff, that creates a lot of FOMO when I see a piece like that come up used. Even if I didn't have plans for it, I don't need it. I'm like, oh, it's a unicorn. Will I ever have another chance? And then every time I get one, there's like 3 on the used market the next week. But that's sort of like inavailability is or collectoriness of it is also a factor.
And that's interesting too for some of the older stuff, like the original HE6 and things like that, or like the Sennheiser 580, or there's some of these things that like they're not necessarily better, or I mean they're discontinued. They were discontinued for a reason, right? Like most of the times, but like just because they're harder to find now, they've kind of taken on this mythical persona that people just feel like they need to try it.
Yeah, like the Foztex THXOO series.
Yeah,
right. Like that's one that I can think of right now that they discontinued that for a while, and now when they do come up used, they sell for more than the MSRP was when they were a regular item. And I think so. I mean, I would just caution anybody, if you're ever feeling that way where you like need to try something, you probably need to take a step back and take a breath. And like I can almost guarantee you it's not going to be earth-shatteringly better or different, or it's not going to change the world, right? Like and maybe just after trying enough gear, like that's just a realization that I've come to as well, that I'm not as desperate anymore, because it's just I don't know. You guys know what I'm saying, though, right? Like, yeah, I do. I mean, you build these things up in your mind to be the end-all, be-all, and maybe I've had enough letdowns, or just, not necessarily letdowns, but just I've been hit with the realistic expectations of gear at this point, to where I don't get myself too excited about things, but...
It sounds so sad. I'm with you. So, all right, if you're not a reviewer, like I'm hearing a lot of like tiny violins playing for us about, just people keep giving me gear to listen to. What a pain. So if you're not a reviewer, like how do you get yourself out of the hype cycle? Like, I think we've all said trying more stuff definitely tamps down that.
Yeah, I mean, I
urge.
almost think that like it's one of those almost life experiences that you have to have, meaning at some point you've got to be burned by a hype train. I think to have that experience of just saying, you know what, I'm gonna take a beat on this one, and also to learn to recognize the signs of a hype train, because like having done this, like, even though I look like chronologically, I've only really been heavy into the headphone side of this hobby and following YouTube reviews and all that for like 5-ish years maybe, which doesn't feel like a very long time. I mean, it's not a very long time in the scope of things. But even within that period, there have been several cycles where I have seen hype trains come and go, and they do have common elements to them, and you can kind of see where they are and what's going on, and like you can also start to predict, like, oh, that one's going to be a hype train, like, here it comes, and some of that is you do have to pay attention to what you're doing. And like I remember, like, early on in my headphone exploration, like I got burned by the monolith M1060, right? Like that was just, I mean, you want to talk shouty mid-range, oh my goodness. like that had that going on, and like the early THX amps, right? Like those were two really memorable hype trains where everyone's like, oh my goodness, end game. Or like in the case of the M1060, it was like, this is going to completely reset the market. And it's like those early THX amps couldn't do soundstage. They were really sharp and shrill and just like all of those kinds of things. And it's just like, yeah, you got to get burned, and you have to be willing to learn from getting burned.
Well, and maybe and you just start to understand that it's hyperbole, right? Like people use hyperbole to make it interesting and to make it fun, and you just have to recognize it for what it is. It's like being a like a sportscaster almost, you know what I mean? Like you
every
really
game is exciting.
You get you talk, you get excited, you use you go boom, and I don't know. You just you gotta
a John Madden reference there. That's going back a ways. Nice.
All right, well, I feel like we've had a very mature and productive conversation here, but like, what are you guys thinking about upgrading right now? Like, what's what's on your personal hype train? Like, what's the thing that you're sort of like, oh, I want to address this in my system, or I really got to try that?
I'll blame this one on you, Sign, because I was talking about, I think I was just saying how much I was enjoying my Felix Echo or something like that, and you were like, well, have you tried a transformer coupled 2 amp? Because, oh boy. So, yeah, that was mine. I've got a Quicksilver Audio headphone amp that I just picked up. I traded, actually, for it, so I didn't have to spend any money on it, which was cool. But that was my thing, and then, that's pretty much it for me. I don't really have, like, an inkling to upgrade at this point in time, but I just got it though, so I'm experimenting still. So
right, you're still in the like that. It's been tamped down. You're breathing slower now. You're like, new piece of gear, new piece of gear.
It is nice. It is great, and it does offer, I don't know, a noticeably improved experience over the Felix Echo, I would say. But it'll have its own review. I don't need to dive into that too much right here. What about you guys?
Oh, am I next? Let's see. What have I been thinking about lately? One thing, particularly like in the higher end, there's because of the help of a friend of the channel, like I have been sent like a lot of really high end, top of the line kinds of headphones, and like one thing that I wish I was able to do, I'm just not in a financial position to be able to do it, anytime soon, is have, multiple different signal chains that I can cycle those things through, right? And so I think about different combinations that I could have, like different gear stacks that I could have to be able to do that. Like, I tend to be a person who likes to put a very neutral and incisive piece of source gear together with a warmer and smoother source piece, and just like try to marry those two worlds. So just the way it has worked out now, like I mentioned earlier, like I have that Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, which is very neutral, very incisive. And then I pair it with the Vio V281, which is much warmer, smoother, and it brings a fair amount of physicality. Like it's got some hard-hitting low end on it, like, and that sort of thing. But that doesn't work for every headphone, so I'd like to have other pieces of gear, like, maybe try a hollow May, which has like supposedly a smoother kind of presentation to it, and pair that with a more aggressive sounding amplifier, like something from Headamp, like their GS X series, or something like that. Just little ideas like that, because I can do that in the mid-fi and budget price points, but I just don't have the resources available to do that with every headphone on the really high end of it yet. And I would like to. I think that would really help paint a clearer picture about what any of those things are before someone drops $4,000+ on any of them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've learned so much about each component by being able to have comparisons, right? And so like being able to have a chain that I know commonly does one thing, like sort of has a presentation that I can recognize across multiple headphones is super educational, right? Because when you go from one headphone to the next and you know what that presentation is, and now it's shifted a little this way or a little that way, that tells you, I think that's a really great way to understand like what actual are the performant qualities of this piece of gear.
Yeah, there's a school of thought out there that I have to respectfully disagree with, and that is the comparisons are evil idea, right? And I understand a little bit where they're coming from insofar as like ultimately for the vast majority of people who buy any of these things, it's like you're going to be listening to them mostly in a vacuum, right? I mean, not a literal vacuum because you wouldn't be able to hear it, but like it's going to be your own piece of gear, right? You're not going to have a lot of other stuff right next to it. You're going to have to be able to enjoy that piece for a period of time without anything to compare it to. So like there is some value in that school of thought. But I think more importantly, it is fair to ask, like, is this thing that I bought worth the price to, like, does it fit in the price to performance scale? Okay. Or if you're thinking about buying a piece, how do you know it's going to work for you? Like you never know for sure. But as we talked about earlier, by hearing opinions from people who, like, you have common points of reference with, be they reviewers or friends from forums or whatever, right? Like, you can start to decrease the odds that you're not going to like that thing and have to go through another round of returns or selling and buying again, right? And I think that's where comparisons really are helpful. One, they help you know that you're being treated fairly, right, by whoever is selling you this thing. And two, it's like, it increases the chances that you're going to get something you like. So, that's why. So, I mean, that's another reason why I just mentioned what I did. Like, I'd love to have multiple signal chains beyond my own personal curiosity, but just because I take this work seriously of, like, trying to be as honest in evaluating a product as I can be, and I think it's necessary to do comparisons to do that work.
Well, I think even just having multiple pieces of gear that you can swap in and out and try, that might actually be, I think for me, is I kind of use it as a way to, prevent having to buy more things, is if I can just change something,
True.
So I can switch out and I can use a tube amp and then I can switch to something else and I can go solid state, and I can try just different sounds in different locations in my house and stuff, just depending on the circumstance. And then, a little bit of change can maybe help, feel like you don't need to buy something else to get that different sound anyway. And I know that Randy over at Cheap Audio, man, I know he always says the best set of $1,000 speakers is two $500 speakers. So you can listen to one for a couple weeks, and then you can swap them out, and you can listen to the other ones, and then
right,
So I think
not entirely wrong.
So I think there's some truth to that as well, and just having some options so you don't feel just like that you're locked into one thing all the time.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a really functional takeaway. Is like if you can.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you can be thoughtful in what your total spend is, and maybe it's 2 sets of headphones, 1 amp, 1 DAC. Maybe it's no DAC, 2 amps, like whatever the right combo is for your budget and interests, like being intentionally about pushing those things further away from each other, like trying to get things that really do change the presentation so that you can mix and match and like give yourself a few experiences as you fatigue on one, or just kind of need to wake up and want to hear something with a fresh point of view. So
Yeah.
I like that. I think that helps a lot potentially with ugraditis.
It's a good point. 'Cause, like, every time I grab my HD6XX or my DT880 and I plug it into my K and tube amp, I'm like, why don't I do this more? You know, so yeah.
Well,
sometimes
that's
just that little change, and you're like, oh yeah, right. Yeah.
I feel like I'll steal your line, MrAyrit. I feel like that's a good place to end it. That sounds about right to me.
So I don't know. Maybe we can conclude this by saying, do any of us feel like we are off the ugraditis or FOMO, or is that just something that we feel like we're all going to have to just kind of live with and deal with here?
You sound like maybe you've made the most peace with it. I feel like I have created more space for it now, where it doesn't. I will always be interested in hearing new things. I will always be interested in trying to get closer to what I perceive as the right sound quality for me. This is both in 2-channel and in headphones. Like, I will always want to evolve my systems, but I can do it now at a much more leisurely pace, a much more considered pace. I make far fewer purchases that I then regret now, because I have introduced more space into the process, read a few more reviews, think a little harder about it, think about my past experiences and synergy. Just I've created that space to not get sucked in. But no, I will probably never stop wanting to upgrade.
Yeah, I guess for me, like, I don't feel the need and the pressure to act as quickly to upgrade as I did, like, even 2 years ago, right? It's kind of like reaching a point where the gear that I have on hand is mostly satisfying. It is not perfect, but and then, like, you know, another side effect of reviewing and like, you know, Signcraft mentioned the violins that everyone's going to be playing for us on this. Like, I know that I'm in a position where I'm just going to get a variety of sounds through here and get new listening experiences all the time. So I personally have not felt a strong drive, at least on the headphone side, like all that. Like, right now I'm kind of feeling itchy because the subwoofer in my speaker system, the amp crapped out on it, and so it's like,
Well, that's a good excuse, though.
You're right.
That's not
You're right.
that
It's like
great. That's just a fix.
I've always wanted to try dual subs. You know, and so like that's what I'm feeling more right now. But yeah, it's like I have reached a point where the curiosity is never going to die, right? Like, I think as Sign just said, like, it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be some non-zero level of drive to try something. I have found an effective way to scratch that itch more often than not, and so I personally have not felt the pressure to do massive upgrades very quickly anymore. All that. But again, like, I am getting more and more curious on speakers. That's something I've always enjoyed and have wanted to get into reviewing more. Not that I don't love headphones, I do, and we'll continue to do that. But yeah, so it's I mean,
so it
call
sounds like
maturity, but I hate to use that term about myself.
So it doesn't sound like any of us have escaped it, but we're all
it's
just
more about
tempering
managing it.
Yeah, we're all just learning to
Come to
manage
terms with
it
it.
a little bit better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Learn to love yourself.
You're always recovering.
You
You're
know?
always in recovery.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I think that was a good discussion. I know I enjoyed it. If nothing else, it's almost like a support group, at least for the issue here. So Wave, thanks for joining us on this
Recorded
one.
and broadcast to the world.
Hopefully, Wave, you have a chance to get back with us again on some of these in the future.
Yeah, it was fun. That would be great. So thanks for having me today.
And like usual, we'll have links to all our channels and various things down below in the description if you want to check those out. And hopefully we'll see you in the next one.
All right, guys. See ya.
See ya.
Bye.